The convoy stopped moving at 0600 hours, though no order had been given to halt. Lieutenant Volkov walked the length of the column, his boots crunching through snow that rose past his knees. 60 trucks stretched behind him into the grey dawn, their engines idling, exhaust rising into air so cold it burned the lungs. The forest pressed close on both sides, endless white birch and pine, branches heavy with snow, silent as a held breath. "Why have we stopped?" he asked the driver of the lead truck. The man didn't look at him. His hands gripped the steering wheel, though the vehicle wasn't moving. "The man in front, Comrade Lieutenant. He won't go forward." Volkov followed his gaze to a soldier standing in the road 20 meters ahead. The man's rifle hung at his side. He was staring into the trees. "Get him moving," Volkov said. The driver shook his head once, a tiny movement. "He's been standing there for 3 minutes. Won't move, won't speak." Volkov walked forward, his irritation rising. The entire 163rd Rifle Division was supposed to reach the village of Suomussalmi by nightfall. They were already 2 hours behind schedule, and now this. One paralyzed soldier holding up an entire supply column because he'd lost his nerve in the woods. "Soldier," Volkov called, "return to your position." The man didn't turn. He was young, maybe 19, with a thin face made thinner by weeks of inadequate rations. His breath came in rapid clouds. "Soldier, I gave you an order." "Something's watching us," the young man whispered. Volkov stopped 3 paces behind him. The forest was utterly still. Not a branch moved, not a bird sang. Even the wind had died. "There's nothing!" The young soldier's head snapped back. The crack of the rifle shot came a half-second later, rolling across the snow like distant thunder. The soldier fell backward into Volkov's arms, suddenly heavy, his eyes still open and staring at the white sky. There was a hole the size of a ruble coin above his left eye. Volkov dropped him and dove for the ditch beside the road. Chaos erupted behind him. Soldiers poured from trucks, shouting, firing blindly into the trees. Officers screamed for order. Machine guns opened up, raking the forest left and right, shredding bark and branches. The noise was tremendous, a roar of panic and rage. And when it stopped, when the guns finally fell silent and the echoes faded, the forest gave back nothing. No return fire, no movement, just the settling of disturbed snow and the ringing in Volkov's ears. He lay in the ditch for another 30 seconds, breathing hard, before rising to his knees. Around him, 200 soldiers scanned the tree line with weapons raised. The forest looked exactly as it had before, white, still, empty. "Anyone see where it came from?" Volkov shouted. No one had. The shot could have come from anywhere within 300 meters, perhaps more. The forest was a wall of shadows and snow-laden branches, perfect cover stretching to the horizon in every direction. "Spread out," Volkov ordered. "Search pattern. Find him." Major Dmitriev appeared at his elbow. He was older, with a grey moustache, and eyes that had seen the revolution. "They won't find anything. We have to try. We can try." Dmitriev's voice was flat. "The result will be the same." They organized 40 men into search teams and sent them into the trees. Volkov watched them go, their dark uniforms stark against the snow. They moved in pairs, covering each other, weapons ready. Within minutes, the forest had swallowed them. He could hear them calling to each other, their voices muffled by the trees. 15 minutes passed. The sun climbed higher but gave no warmth. The temperature was 25 below zero, perhaps colder. Then another shot. Single. Flat. Final. The calling stopped. In the silence that followed, Volkov could hear his own heartbeat. "Vasily?" someone shouted from the trees. "Vasily, answer me." No answer came. The search teams returned 20 minutes later, carrying a body between them. The bullet had entered under the chin and exited through the top of the skull. The snow around where he'd fallen was stained red in a wide circle. "Did you find any tracks?" Volkov asked. "Tracks everywhere," one of the soldiers said. He was shaking, though whether from cold or fear, Volkov couldn't tell. Ski tracks, boot prints, All of them old, nothing fresh. He was there and then he wasn't. That's impossible. Tell that to Vasily. The convoy moved again at noon, after 3 more hours of fruitless searching. They left the bodies where they'd fallen. The ground was too frozen to dig, and no one wanted to remain in that place any longer than necessary. The trucks rolled slowly forward, engines grinding, men standing on the running boards with rifles ready, scanning the trees. Nothing happened. The forest watched them go in silence. That night, in a commandeered schoolhouse that served as temporary headquarters, Volkov studied the map spread across a teacher's desk. Dmitriev stood beside him, smoking a cigarette that smelled of poor tobacco and desperation. "How many today?" Volkov asked. "Division-wide? 37 confirmed. Probably more we haven't found yet." 37. Volkov looked up. "In one day?" "Welcome to Finland." Dmitriev tapped ash onto the floor. "They call them White Death. The men are starting to refuse forward patrols. Can't say I blame them." "They're just men with rifles." "No." Dmitriev's expression was grim. "They're ghosts. They appear, they kill, they vanish. We never see them. We can't predict them. Machine guns don't frighten them. Numbers don't impress them. Yesterday, a sergeant, good man, veteran of Poland, he sat down in the snow and refused to move. Said he'd rather face a firing squad than walk another meter into those trees. What happened to him? I had him shot. It didn't improve morale." Volkov returned his attention to the map, though the lines and symbols meant nothing now. The plan had been simple. Overwhelm the Finns with superior numbers, capture the key road junctions, cut their country in half. Instead, entire battalions were disappearing into the forest, men dying one by one to an enemy they couldn't see or strike back against. "How do they do it?" he asked quietly. "The Finns?" Dmitriev crushed his cigarette under his boot. "They're born to it. This is their land. They know every tree, every ridge, every frozen lake. They move on skis, can cover 30 kilometers in a day without leaving clear tracks. They wear white. They work alone or in pairs. They're patient. And they understand something we don't, that one bullet, precisely placed, is worth more than 1,000 fired blind. We should level the forests. With what? Artillery? We'd need 10,000 shells to clear even a square kilometer, and they'd just move deeper. No, Volkov, we can't fight this war their way. Our advantage is armor, artillery, numbers. We need to draw them into open battle. And if they refuse?" Dmitriev didn't answer. He didn't need to. 3 days later, Volkov accompanied a supply run to forward positions near the village of Rate. The road was narrow, hemmed in by forest on both sides. Tanks led the column now, followed by trucks filled with infantry, then more tanks at the rear. Between each vehicle, soldiers marched with rifles ready. The forest here was darker, older. The trees grew so thick that even at midday, shadows pooled between them. Snow had drifted into enormous banks that turned the landscape into an alien maze of white dunes and dark channels. They found the first bodies at a crossroads. 20 men, maybe 30. It was hard to count because they'd frozen into grotesque positions, reaching for rifles, crawling toward cover, curled into fetal balls. Their uniforms were white with frost. Their faces were blue-black. "How long have they been here?" Volkov asked. The medical officer knelt beside one corpse, examining it without touching. 3 days, perhaps 4. Hard to say. The cold preserves everything. Cause of death? This one? The medical officer pointed to a hole in the frozen soldier's throat. Single shot. The others, same. 1 bullet each. They never had time to return fire. Volkov walked among the dead, his breath fogging in the air. Their weapons were still loaded, magazines full. Whatever killed them had done so faster than they could react. He looked into the trees, searching for... what? Movement? A glint of sunlight on a scope? Some sign that death was watching? He saw nothing. Just trees and snow and silence. The convoy moved on, more slowly now. Every kilometre took longer than the last. The men grew increasingly nervous, flinching at every sound, firing at shadows. Twice they stopped to investigate shapes in the snow that turned out to be fallen logs covered in frost. Once they killed a deer that bounded across the road, a dozen rifles cracking in unison, the animal torn apart before it hit the ground. "We're losing discipline," Dmitriev observed. "We're losing men," Volkov replied. That night they circled the vehicles into a defensive perimeter and built fires in oil drums. Guards walked the line in 2-hour shifts, stamping their feet, breathing into their gloves. Volkov tried to sleep in the back of a truck, but gave up after an hour. Every sound made him reach for his pistol. The crack of ice breaking, the groan of metal contracting in the cold, the soft thump of snow falling from overloaded branches. At 0300 hours, the shooting started. Volkov rolled from the truck as rifles opened up all around the perimeter. Orange muzzle flashes stabbed the darkness. Tracer rounds streaked into the forest like angry fireflies. Men shouted, cursed, called for ammunition. "Where are they?" Volkov yelled. "Everywhere," a sergeant screamed back. "They're all around us." But they weren't. Volkov realized it after 30 seconds of chaos. The shooting was coming only from Soviet positions. The forest was giving back nothing. No muzzle flashes, no return fire, no screams. They were shooting at ghosts. "Cease fire!" he shouted. "Cease fire, damn you all!" It took 5 minutes to restore order. When silence finally descended, Volkov did a quick count. 3 men dead, 5 wounded, all from friendly fire in the panic. And, out in the forest, nothing. No bodies, no blood trails, no evidence that an enemy had ever been there. "Someone fired the first shot," Dmitriev said, appearing beside him. "Someone saw something." They found him at the south end of the perimeter, a private named Kirov, 19 years old, from a village outside Moscow. He sat on the ground with his rifle across his knees, staring into the trees. "What did you see?" Volkov demanded. "A man," Kirov whispered. "In the trees. White uniform, white face, white everything. He was right there." He pointed with a shaking hand. 30 meters away, just standing there watching us. "Did you hit him?" "I don't know. He was there, then he wasn't. Like smoke." Volkov took a patrol into the trees at first light. They found tracks, ski tracks, clear and fresh in the new snow. The tracks led away from the perimeter in a straight line, going north through the densest part of the forest where trucks couldn't follow. Every 100 meters or so, the tracks stopped beside a large tree where the snow was disturbed, as if someone had knelt or stood for a long time, observing, watching, waiting. "We should follow them," one of the soldiers said. Dmitriev shook his head. "That's what he wants. Draw us deeper into the forest, separate us from the column, pick us off one by one. We'd be corpses before noon. Then what do? We keep moving, we stay together, we pray." But prayer, Volkov discovered, offered no protection against a bullet you never saw coming. The killing accelerated over the next week. Sometimes it was one shot, sudden and final, leaving a body in the snow and terror in the survivors. Sometimes it was a patient campaign, a sniper positioning himself along a column's route, killing 1 man every 10 minutes as they passed, too far away for effective return fire, vanishing before they could organize a response. The psychological effect was devastating. Men began to break under the strain, the constant fear of invisible death transforming disciplined soldiers into nervous wrecks who jumped at shadows and fired at ghosts. Volkov watched a lieutenant shoot himself rather than lead his squad on patrol. He saw a platoon refuse a direct order to clear a forest section, the men standing with rifles lowered, faces blank, ready to accept execution rather than walk into those trees. He heard stories that grew more fantastic each telling, of Finnish snipers who could hit a target at 2,000 meters, who could shoot through walls, who weren't human at all but spirits of the forest come to defend their land. The truth, when he finally learned it, was somehow worse. It came from a prisoner they captured in a night raid on a farm, a young Finnish soldier, barely 20, with frost-scarred cheeks and empty hands raised in surrender. They brought him to Dmitriev's headquarters, a barn that stank of animals and unwashed men. Volkov watched through a window as Dmitriev questioned him. The Finn spoke Russian, surprisingly well. His name was Arne. He was a hunter before the war, from a village near the Soviet border. He'd been in the forest for 3 weeks. "How many Russians have you killed?" Dmitriev asked. "I don't count anymore." "Estimate?" Arne shrugged. 40, maybe 50. I don't know. 50 men, by yourself. I work alone. Most of us do. It's safer that way. How? You move slowly. You use the terrain. You think like prey, not like a hunter. You watch for a long time before you shoot. And you only shoot when you're certain. Certain of the target, certain of the shot, certain of your escape route. 1 bullet, 1 kill, then you're gone. Sometimes I lie in one position for 8 hours waiting for the right moment. Sometimes I let entire patrols pass because the shot isn't clean. Patience is everything. What about the cold? I was born in it. I know how to make shelters, how to stay warm without fires. I carry dried fish and bread in my pack. I melt snow for water. At night I ski 20 kilometers to a safe house, sleep for a few hours, ski back before dawn. Your soldiers, they're city boys. They don't belong here. They're loud, slow, obvious. They wear dark uniforms against white snow. They move in groups, which makes them easy to find, and they're afraid, which makes them predictable. You don't feel guilt? For what? Defending my country? Arne's expression hardened. You invaded us. You bomb our cities. You brought 100,000 men to crush a nation of 3 million. What did you expect? That we'd surrender? This is our land. We know every trail, every frozen marsh, every ridge line. You're the invaders. You're the foreigners. Here, in this forest, you have no advantages. Only targets painted on your backs. Volkov turned away from the window. His hands were shaking. The Finn's words had stripped away every comfortable illusion, every excuse. They weren't fighting an army here. They were fighting a land itself, and the men who'd grown from it like the trees. Patient, silent, deadly. Dmitriev emerged from the barn 20 minutes later. His face was grave. "What will happen to him?" Volkov asked. "Prison camp, most likely. He'll probably live longer than most of our men out here." Dmitriev lit a cigarette, his hands cupped against the wind. "He told me something else, about the man they call the White Death. Have you heard the stories?" "I've heard many stories. This one's real. A farmer named Häyhä, Simo Häyhä. Over 500 confirmed kills, they say, most with iron sights, because a scope lens can reflect light and give away position. He's out here somewhere, moving through these forests. The Finns have dozens like him. Not professionals, not soldiers trained in academies, just farmers and hunters who know this land better than they know their own faces. And they're angry. We've given them every reason to be. How do we stop them?" Dmitriev smoked in silence for a long moment. "We don't. We survive them. We take our casualties, we keep moving forward, and we hope that numbers and machinery will eventually overwhelm skill and determination. But Volkov?" He looked at the younger man directly. "Never doubt what we're facing. These men, these Finnish hunters in their white camouflage, they've turned modern warfare backward. They've made every advantage we possess meaningless. Our tanks get stuck in snow. Our planes can't see through the trees. Our artillery shells sink into drifts without detonating. And our men, they're dying one shot at a time, killed by an enemy they'll never see." The convoy reached Suomussalmi on December 28th, 3 weeks behind schedule. Of the 200 trucks that left the staging area, 87 arrived intact. The rest were scattered along 300 kilometers of forest road, burned or abandoned, surrounded by frozen corpses that would remain there until spring thaw. Volkov stood on a small hill overlooking the village, watching columns of smoke rise from cooking fires. Behind him, the forest stretched to the horizon. white, silent, indifferent. How many snipers were out there now, watching them? 5? 50? How many bullets were already chambered, waiting for targets to present themselves? He would never know. That was the horror of it. Death here came without warning, without reason, without mercy. It came from the trees, from the snow, from the silence itself, and there was no defense against it, except to keep moving, keep hoping, keep surviving one more day. Dmitriev joined him on the hill. Neither man spoke for a long time. Finally, Volkov asked, "How do you sleep?" "I don't." Dmitriev's breath fogged in the Arctic air. "None of us do. Not really. We close our eyes and listen to the forest. We wait for the sound that might be our last. The crack of a rifle we'll never hear, fired by a man we'll never see, from a position he abandoned 30 seconds after pulling the trigger. They're just men." "No," Dmitriev said softly. "There's something else. Something we forgot existed. They're what happens when you invade the winter, the forest, and the silence all at once. They're the land's revenge, and we're paying for our arrogance in blood and terror." That night, Volkov sat alone in a requisitioned house, writing a letter he would never send. The words came slowly, each one pulled from a place of exhaustion and fear he hadn't known existed. "We came here expecting victory. We found only cold and death. The Finns are not soldiers in the way we understand soldiers. They are ghosts who kill and vanish, leaving only corpses and confusion. They have turned our invasion into a nightmare from which there is no waking. And the worst of it? They're winning. Not with tanks or planes or artillery, but with patience, with intimate knowledge of their land, with the simple, terrible efficiency of one well-placed bullet delivered from invisible hands. I am afraid, not of dying, but of the manner of it. Sudden, random, meaningless. To be picked off like an animal while the hunter remains forever hidden. To fall in the snow and know, in that last second, that no one will ever find the man who killed me, that he is already gone, skiing away through trees, his weapons slung across his back, returning to a warm house and a hot meal, while I freeze in a forest that will forget I ever existed. This is not war. This is extermination, and we are not the exterminators. He burned the letter in the stove and watched the paper curl and blacken. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 30 below zero. Guards huddled in their positions, weapons ready, eyes scanning the tree line, waiting for death to emerge from the darkness. But the forest kept its secrets. It always did. 2 weeks later, a shell fragment from Soviet artillery caught up with Arne the Finnish sniper in a different part of the forest. He died instantly, his white camouflage stained red, his rifle fallen beside him in clean snow. By then, he'd killed 63 men. It changed nothing. For every sniper that fell, 2 more took up rifles. For every Soviet soldier who survived the winter, 3 more had been left behind in the frozen woods, their bodies preserved by the terrible cold, their eyes still open and staring at a sky that offered no answers. Volkov lived. He survived the winter war and returned to Russia with frostbitten feet and nightmares that never fully faded. He never spoke of Finland to anyone, not his family, not his comrades, not even to himself in the quiet hours before dawn. But sometimes, in the depths of Russian winters, he would stand at his window and stare at the snow-covered trees beyond his apartment block. And in the silence, he would listen for the crack of a rifle that never came. The forest had taught him its final lesson, that some fears, once learned, never die. They simply wait in the cold and the quiet, patient as snipers in white camouflage, ready to remind you that safety is an illusion and death can come from anywhere. The snow remembers everything. It always has.